will give a little background about my family situation. I was raised in an abusive home. I know a lot of people struggle using that term because they feel like, well, I could have had it worse. Things could have been worse. I had my material needs met. Um, I have no right to complain, right? When everybody is struggling in the world and everything is hard. Yes, you do have a right to complain. You have a right to be upset when things hurt you. When you are neglected emotionally, you have a right to be upset and be angry. Emotional neglect is a form of abuse. It is not just about the things your parents bought or didn't buy you. It is not about money. It is about, are they emotionally capable of being the parent in the moment when you need them? Are they an emotional support for you when you need an ear, when you need advice, when you need a friend, when you need a mom, when you need a dad, when you need guidance in this world? Their job as your parent is to guide you, is to help you, is to nurture you if you are going to be a successful adult. If they're not doing that, then you are set up to be much behind other people with supportive families. So just know that emotional neglect is abuse. Verbal abuse is abuse. Just because you don't have bruises on your back, just because you don't have a bruise to show a social worker or a therapist, you still have those wounds inside. You still have the trauma that you grew up with. I really recommend this book called The Body Keeps the Score. If anyone tells you that emotional abuse or neglect is not abuse, that, oh, everything was fine, your father was fine, he didn't hit you, right? That is not true. Emotional abuse is actually, according to psychologists, emotional abuse causes CPTSD, which causes long-term developmental effects, anxiety, chronic illness, stress disorders, depression. It actually can take away years of your life because you're living in a constant state of fight and flight. Your nervous system literally is overreacting on a constant basis. You have adrenaline built up in your system because of this. And that is why a lot of us are struggling very hard, especially if we are already autistic on top of that and have other struggles. I mean, you add CPTSD on top of that, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So the difference between CPTSD and PTSD. So PTSD is what people are most aware of when it comes to this disorder. It usually happens from one really triggering event. Veterans of war that saw their comrade die in front of them, that is an example of PTSD. It is one very extreme, even it could be more than one, but it is just a few extreme things that happened in your life over a short period of time. Complex PTSD, on the other hand, is constant abuse that has continued to happen throughout long period of time. So we're talking years. This is what happens to children that grow up in abusive families. They get complex PTSD, which means they are living in a constant state of either fight, flight, or freeze. And that affects our personalities and who we become in the family. That affects our personalities, that affects our ability to regulate our emotions, that affects our brain chemistry. People with CPTSD actually have larger amygdalas, which is the area of the brain responsible for regulating emotions. So if you grow up in a chaotic, abusive environment, you literally are set up to have difficulty regulating your emotions and having a healthy way to express those emotions. So either you bottle them all up inside, which is freeze, you freeze and you hold everything in, or you fight, which means you explode and you attack, or you fawn. Fawn is when you become a people pleaser, which is something I did a lot. You fawn to avoid being abused, but then you lose track of who you are as a person. Everything about your personality is created to prevent an explosion, to prevent abuse that you are experiencing on an everyday basis. So fawning is my particular issue. And as I've gotten away from the situation, I definitely have turned more to fight. And that is something that I struggle with. I have to work on my anger. I have to work on my temper and my emotional regulation, so I don't take it out on other people, especially my husband, especially the people in my life, my friends, my family. I really try to work on that every day. So even if I need to take a time out, like if I'm really angry and I need just to go in my bedroom for a while and cry in my bed, I will do that as opposed to screaming for an hour at my husband and hurting him. You know, I will take the time to feel my feeling, to ride the wave of the emotion, to process it, to let it go, and then move on. So a lot of what we struggle with is riding that wave, living in that feeling. And this isn't just people that have CPSD or are neurodivergent. This is people in general. We struggle to really feel those hard moments. So we want to push away anger. We want to push away depression. We want to push away anxiety, right? That doesn't work. It has to go somewhere. Energy expands, pushes and pulls, but it never goes away. So we have to find healthier ways to express those feelings. And what works for me is making these videos sometimes, watching YouTube videos. My favorite psychologist by far is Dr. Ramani Diversula. I think that's how you say Diversula. She is amazing. She probably saved my life. She is an expert on narcissistic personality disorder. And if you really think that this isn't a huge issue in our country of America, then you need to go to her channel, because you're going to see these people pop up in your life. Your boss, your friend, your neighbor, the leader of your church, if you're religious, you're going to see these people pop up. Politicians in particular, the political career draws narcissists like flies to honey. There are different ways that narcissistic personality disorder presents. There are a few general types of narcissists. So there is the grandiose narcissist. This is the narcissist that is incredibly arrogant, entitled, charismatic. They often are two-faced, if that makes sense. They can put on a public persona and be Mr. Charming or Mrs. Charming. They can be affable. They can be funny. They can be the life of the party in public. And then when you get home, they flip and become something else. They take out any insecurities they have, any issues they had that day on their family, on their children, on their spouse, and they become Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, basically. So you think everything's fine one minute, and the next they flip and become this monster, and it happens. And my father is this type of narcissist. He is a grandiose narcissist. The only level worse than this is a malignant narcissist. We're talking people that actually take pleasure and go out of their way to cause pain in other people. I don't necessarily think he does that, but I think he's very unaware of the damage he causes, and his ego is so fragile that he can't take any criticism. He can't take anyone standing up for themselves. I know for a fact I was the black sheep of the family because I would stand up to the abuse he inflicted on our family. I would stand up to the abuse he inflicted on my mother, on me, on my sister, and he definitely took it out on me. He took out his rage on me because I was the one to stand up to him and our family and not tolerate it. So, yeah, I'm definitely the scapegoat in a family. They get blamed for all the problems that occur in the family. It is the hardest position to be in the family, but also in some ways it's easier because you really can see through their crap. You can see through the manipulation. A lot of us get away, we cut contact, or we gray rock. Gray rock means you don't show emotion. You will be there for like legal issues you might have with them, or maybe you'll show up once a year at Christmas and that's it. And you keep anything personal out of the conversation. That's gray rocking. And that's a technique I really do recommend with narcissistic people. Do not Do not feed into their drama. Do not feed into the fight. Anything you say to defend yourself, they can flip. They can turn it around and make it so they are the victim. They can make you the villain. Any ammo you give them, they will direct it right back at you. So do not share anything personal with them. Just, that's gray rocking, or you go no contact. So if you have a really, really severely abusive relationship where they're gaslighting you on a regular basis and it is not good for your mental health to talk to them or be around them, that is no contact. So I am no contact with a few members of my family, and it is incredibly hard to do this. And I definitely recommend having a support group. So therapy, a therapist, a supportive spouse, supportive friends, group therapy, Reddit, if you don't have money to go to a therapist. I mean, talk all of these things out with people. Don't go through this alone, because you're not alone. A lot of us go through this, and it is more common than you think, honestly, this rampant abuse that happens in these families. So going no contact is always the last choice, but sometimes it's the only choice if you're going to maintain your mental sanity. I really knew it wouldn't be safe to tell him that I'm autistic or show any kind of weakness to him, because I think he would use it to manipulate me or those in my life. So I never felt safe opening up to him about anything personal about myself, even as a child. And yeah, that's how I knew I had to go no contact with him. Is it easy? Does it get easier? It does get a little easier. You always wonder what could have been. You have to grieve for the childhood you're never going to have. Basically, you have to make the life you wanted as a child. I'm kind of going through this process of reparenting myself. So I have a mental health mascot. His name is Totoro from My Neighbor Totoro. I am using him to represent child Christy, me as a child, me who needed care and love, and I am working on remothering her, being the mother and the family I needed to be happy and supported. And this is child Christy, and I recommend, if you want to go through the reparenting process, find a doll, find a childhood icon that you identify with. Find something that brings you a joy, that makes you smile, that is a comfort object. And when things are particularly hard, give it a hug, give it a squeeze. Blankets work great for this, anxiety blankets. Maybe get an anxiety blanket with like a cute pattern on it. Like my thing was Care Bears growing up. I'm old. I'm a millennial, but I think they came back for a while too, right? I don't know. But whatever childhood thing you were into, find like a blanket that has that on it, or a doll, or whatever, stuffed animal. And whenever you're feeling sad for that childhood you never had, give that doll a squeeze, cuddle up in that blanket, and just be that parent that you wanted for yourself. Again, I want to reiterate that I am not a therapist. I have been through a lot of therapy. I have been working on myself a long time in therapy, and I do mostly online therapy because I'm autistic. I hate making small talk. It's really hard for me. And I know a lot of autistic people struggle with talk therapy because we struggle to verbalize our feelings. So if you struggle with that, you're not alone. It's very hard, and it doesn't always work great for autistic people, but sometimes just reading the books, watching the YouTube videos, talking about it in an online group kind of helps, like group therapy, but without all the pressure and the eye contact of being in a group setting. That can really help. So you're not alone if you're going through this, and just know that it does get easier. It's going to be a sad thing you have to process every day. Just like depression doesn't go away. It's something you have to deal with, but just understanding why you feel depressed makes a huge difference. Like knowing that this isn't coming from nowhere. This is a real thing that happened to me, and it continues to affect my everyday life because, yes, my brain chemistry is different. And a lot of chronic illnesses are tied to CPSD. There's a high correlation between people that have fibromyalgia and those that grew up in abusive environments. If you think you're crazy, if you think there's no reason you should be feeling the way you do, other people might have had it harder than you, but it's not a competition. Trauma is not a competition with other people. It is how it affects you. Maybe someone else doesn't struggle with it as much. You could have grown up in the same household with someone and they weren't as affected. A lot of that is because there are roles in families, and one role in particular I didn't have was the golden child. That was my sister. They get idealized in the family. They're seen as the most similar to the parent. So she is the most similar to my father in her mannerisms and her emotional maturity level, her beliefs, her interests. They're very much similar. So he sees her as like a mini me, if that makes sense. And he sees me as his enemy in a way, because I put up a mirror to the behavior that I don't find acceptable that he does. And I point it out to him, and he doesn't want to see that. He doesn't want to accept that he doesn't want to accept that in himself. One way you will know for sure the person probably is on the spectrum of narcissistic personality disorder. And again, it is a spectrum as well. Some people have a milder case of it. Some people are more extreme, and some people present in totally different ways, but it is a spectrum. And so you have to look at the symptoms to see how severe the abuse is and how severe the situation is. I was going to go into some of the different ways it presents. So there's grandiose narcissists, like we talked about, like my father. The type that a lot of people aren't aware of is vulnerable narcissists. So they're on the opposite side of the grandiose narcissist spectrum. So they basically become the victim. They have a victimized mentality. Everything is everybody else's fault. If I only had that job promotion, if I only had that opportunity, my life would have been different. I'm sad because my grandkids didn't call me. They must hate me. Everybody hates me. It's a victim mentality. So instead of, I don't know, calling the grandkid themselves, they blame their loneliness on the other person, and they don't communicate their feelings in a healthy way. They're extremely passive aggressive. They will give you a negative compliment, a negging thing, like, "Ooh, you would be so pretty if you wore your hair up." They will give you like this passive aggressive comment to everything. So, for example, I showed my grandmother this purse that I sewed. I had never sewed anything in my life other than a pair of shorts in home ec class. I sewed a purse. It wasn't perfect. It had issues with the seaming, but all she could do was point out the flaws in it. All she could say was how she would have done it different, or how unprofessional it looked. And it was just, it really took the air out of my sail, if that makes sense. Like, instead of offering to help or show me how to sew, she had to bring me down and insult the thing I was proud of. I had just started to learn how to do something, and they are great at taking the wind out of your sail. And they do it in such a passive aggressive voice that they get away with it a lot. Like, people are like, well, they're lonely, they're sad, they're frustrated. We just have to tolerate it. Like, we can't expect any more of them. They don't know any better. And you feel like you can't say anything back to them because they present this victim mentality. They often gaslight you. They say things aren't as bad as they seem. I don't remember saying that. I don't remember doing that. That didn't happen. What are you talking about? They often gaslight as a way to manipulate you into keeping contact with them, keeping in their life. They make you feel insane, basically. And that's how they pull you back in. They make it feel like you're the unhealthy ones. That one tends to be more female oriented. I feel like there are some men that portray these traits, but I feel like a lot of women are in this passive aggressive NPD spectrum. So beware of that one. There's a communal narcissist. So communal narcissists are the people that on the outside, it seems like they're very kind, giving. They are involved in a lot of nonprofits usually. They donate a lot of their time. They donate money to charity. But when you go to talk to them, it is like they're doing it because they like how it makes them look. They like that it makes them feel superior to other people. They like being in control. So if they're in charge of this nonprofit, they're still in control. Like they're the leader of this group. They can manipulate, they can control people in the group. So they get to look like the hero, but behind the scenes, they are not treating people with respect. They're projecting a lot of their insecurities onto their employees, onto the other volunteers. Really good example of this type of character in modern fiction and television is, I don't know if you've ever seen Westworld, but there's a character called the Man in Black. I believe that's what his character's name is. It's Ed Harris's character in that show. Without spoiling too much, he has a stake in Westworld, and he, outside of Westworld, which is like the ultimate reenactment camp for the Wild West fantasy. If you're like a millionaire, this is where you would go on vacation to pretend to be a cowboy for real. But with AI, with robots, with artificial intelligence as the antagonist that you shoot and kill. So he would go there on his vacations, and he had nefarious reasons for running this place. But on the outside, he looked like the ultimate philanthropist. He was in charge of a lot of charities. He donated millions and millions of dollars to charities. He would flip and turn into this different persona when he would come to Westworld to basically unmask his real personality and become who he actually was on the inside. So that is a really good example of a communal narcissist. And I would say on the spectrum, probably malignant tendencies as well, and grandiose. So that is a communal narcissist. But yeah, I know there are more types than that, but those are the ones that I've had the most experience with in my life. And especially being a part of a church growing up, I knew a lot of communal narcissists. I know, again, just so you know, I am an atheist. I don't care what religion you are, what you believe. I don't push my non-belief on anyone. I grew up in an abusive church environment where I know that contributed to a lot of my mental illness and CPTSD. If you know anything about going to Sunday school in a Christian church, you're exposed to like all this hellfire and brimstone rhetoric and preaching and just really violent images and stories from the Bible that little children should not be hearing. I should not be reading. If you're a Christian, that's fine. I have no problem with that. That's fine. But do you really think little children need to be hearing about murdering and raping women in the Bible? Do you really think we need to hear about the mass genocide of multitudes of people, like through flooding that the supposedly loving God inflicted on the planet? Like, it really messes with your mind as a child. And we don't understand that this isn't literal. Maybe this is like figurative or a moral story or whatever. As a child, if you're autistic especially, you take it very literally, and you really feel like unless you can convert everybody in your life and make them a Christian, you think they're going to burn in hell forever. So that's a whole nother video. That's a whole nother form of abuse. But that is a big example of a lot of communal narcissism, especially in our country. A lot of people politicize their religious views and try to make laws they say to uphold their moral beliefs, but really it is to push down people they view as unworthy of support from the government. So just be aware of that. People touting their religious beliefs as a reason not to be a supportive community member or help others in need. There's something really wrong with that, especially if you are a Christian. Being a Christian should be about loving others, loving your neighbor, not judging other people because we don't know what their situation is. If you actually read the words that Jesus said in the Bible, he was very much not this picture of Christianity we are seeing in politics currently. So be aware of communal narcissists. They show up in your communities as church leaders and religious leaders, and they will manipulate you and use their moral authority to control you and manipulate you. So be aware of communal narcissists as well. As always, I am not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I'm just incredibly fascinated in this topic. I probably watched hundreds and hundreds of hours of videos on this topic and read countless self-help books. I will recommend some of my favorites in the description if you want to do a more deep dive into some of these topics on your own time. But I could talk for hours and hours and hours about this topic. So again, I'm autistic. It's one of my special interest areas. So if I annoy you, I'm sorry. You can fast forward, but these are important to be aware of.